Welcome to the first episode of the Whimsical Princess podcast. This is mostly a knitting podcast. I am Spirit Bridger, and I'm just going to give it a go. It took me a long time to settle on a name. I thought about a lot of things, mostly a bunch of puns involving yarn or stitches, and I decided that all of them were a little bit too confining because I'm not just a knitter. I've got lots of other things that I'm going to share with you, like I'm also an artist. Let's see, is it here? Here's one of my old sketchbooks. Just going to open up some random pages. I like to do a lot of abstract stuff. I've also done a lot more that is not abstract. And I also dye yarn. I'm just a little bit of a jack of all trades, and I'm definitely a little bit silly. I like sci-fi, I like magic, I like dragons, I like space. I like cute little critters in astronaut helmets, like otters. I've seen some adorable fabric prints of otters in little astronaut helmets floating on their backs. And let's be real, who doesn't want to go to outer space? So, I'm a bit silly, and that's why this is the Whimsical Princess podcast. I'm going to start by introducing you to a little bit of my knits, because what would a knitting podcast be without some knitting? Let's start with what I'm wearing right now, which is the very first beaded shawl that I ever did. It is Just Be You by Boo Knits, and I'll take it off and show you. I knitted this with Ginger Twist Studios hand-dyed yarn in Yakety-Yak, and the base is a really lovely blend of merino, yak, and silk. I was not expecting to like it quite so much, but it has a lovely bounce to it. It has a beautiful sheen. I'm going to hold it up to the camera and see if it can pick it up at all. It was such a pleasure to work with, and the colorway is Might As Well Be Spring. This was also the very first mystery knit along that I ever did, and you can see I'm very pleased with the results. And I've done a few mystery knit alongs since then, but probably none quite as good as this one. So it was both the best and the worst place to start. But it's a really lovely shawl, and I love it to bits. And the yarn that I used is just gorgeous, and Jess from Ginger Twist Studios has remarked several times about how much I like this particular yarn. It is really lovely. It takes me a while to get my hair sorted though. So that is the first one, and I thought that's a very fitting knit because I'm also working on a new project, which is only my third ever beaded shawl. And it is another mystery knits by Boo Knits. I don't do these terribly often. But this is, and it's still on the needles, this is Shadow Dancer. You can't see it terribly well, but it's also got lovely beads, some lovely lace, and the pattern is progressing quite nicely. I'm not very fond of zigzaggy laces. I'm not very fond of laces with strong triangles, especially the double yarn over triangles. But this I really, really like. When it's the more swooping, longer, elongated shapes, I really quite like those. And the beads are, these are my nicest beads. These are Toho gray beads with a gold lining, and so you can see they're just a little bit more faded. The first one that I used, the beads were a copper that are frankly they were discount beads from Walmart when I visited America. And this Shadow Dancer shawl is so close to finished. I'm actually casting off right now, but it's a picot bind off, and well, I'm not very good at picots, and it's a lot to bind off. It is over 1,150 stitches at the last row, plus all the little extra picots. So it might be a while. And you might notice a theme. I quite like grays and blues and blue-grays. And I've definitely noticed a few similarities between the first one that I made and the one that I'm working on now. But I think I'm going to love them both. Now, the next knit that I want to share with you is my Ishnique shawl. And this is a well-loved shawl. I use this one quite often. This one took me so long to decide on the colors. I knew that I wanted to use this. I wanted to make this shawl for the longest time. And it has these really lovely cable details. But it took me forever to pick out the yarn. And I really thought about going with just the original colors that the designer Lucy Hague used, which were the Malabrigo yarn in Potion and Aguas. So it's actually a very similar color scheme to this, because Potion is a multicolor green and red, and Aguas is, of course, water. So it's a variegated blue. This one's just a flat blue. And eventually, I definitely decided that I wanted to use this multicolor yarn, which is Roast Duck by Shopple Wool. And I really knew that I wanted to use that yarn. I had it. I knew I wanted to make this shawl, but I had to pick the contrast color. And I was just thinking about all the yarns that I have in my stash, or all the yarns that I could have, and none of them seemed quite right. They were either not quite the right color, or they were a little bit of a different consistency. The Shopple Wool's a little bit toothy, and it's not terribly glossy, and I wanted something that suited it. It's a workhorse yarn, and I wanted something that suits it. And then I went to the local Knit Night Christmas dinner, and there was a yarn swap, and I got a cone of this sort of blue-gray, and it's King Cole Anti-Tickle Merino. So it's another superwash yarn. It's meant to be a good tough yarn, and frankly they feel almost identical. And it wasn't until I was getting home and I was almost to the front door and I saw the local fox. It was late at night and he was out and about, and he just stopped right under the street lamp. I know we're getting off on a tangent. He stopped right under the street lamp and just stared at me. And I stopped and I stared at him. We stared at one another for probably a good 10 to 20 seconds. And then I heard a little bark off in the distance. And he cocked his ear, and there was another bark, and he clearly ran off because that was his fox wife calling him. And it was very, very obvious that he wasn't running from a dog's bark. That was his wife calling him home. And it was just after that that I realized that that yarn that I got from the Knit Night Christmas swap was going to be the perfect match to go with my Shopple Wool. And I think it turned out beautifully. But that's why on my Ravelry page, this is called the Foxwife's Call. I was still in a phase of naming all of my knits individual things for each and every thing. I've knit a few too many things and I can't think up that many names, so I've stopped doing that. But on occasion, I will still do something like that. And this one is also beloved by my children. I have two children. I have Corwin, who is 2, going on 3, and I have Katara, who's only a few months shy of turning 1. And they've both used this as a pram blanket, and they love it. Katara, I just draped this over her because I thought she was a little bit chilly, and she adored it. She scrunched it in her fingers, she chewed on the edge, and Corwin did the same thing. I forgot how much Corwin loved it, but I used it as a pram blanket because it is actually a really great shape for a pram blanket. And both my kids love it. And it's sturdy, so it's got a little bit of wear and tear here and there. I'll need to fix that loose end. But it's a great shawl, and I have to make another one because it's gorgeous. And another thing you need to know about me is I'm also a designer. So I have designed knitwear a couple of times. I've only got a few patterns out for sale. The one that I released most recently would be the Featherlane scarf. And these are my 2 samples. So this one is knit in Knit Pick Stroll in the colorway Raven, and it's very difficult to pick up on a camera like this. But I'll do my best. Now, I made this because I quite liked this lace pattern here, but the center seemed a little bit too busy to me, and I wanted something that wasn't just flat stockinette, because of course that doesn't quite sit right either, and it curls too much, and it felt a bit bland. So I designed this slip stitch pattern to go in the center, and it reminded me of cobblestones, and I had a little dream where there were feathers strewn on cobblestones, and it just seemed like a fitting name. So that is the scarf, pardon me, that I released most recently. This was my original sample, and it took 1 1/3 skein. I wanted it to just be a nice long scarf. I like scarves that are very long, and I knit it a little bit wide, and I also knit it on tiny needles. I went all the way down to 2.5 millimeter on this, and yes, it's a bit on the small side, but it turned out to be a really, really lovely scarf. And I wanted to release the pattern, but I thought, you know what, it could probably be done with a little bit more. It could be just a touch narrower, and I could knit it on slightly looser needles. And a lot of people just have one magical skein that they want to turn into a scarf. So I specifically set about making a second sample that would be suitable for just one skein of yarn. And this is Malabrigo Mechita in the colorway Volcan. I love this scarf. It just screams autumn. Super, super soft. They're both super soft. And this one, it turned out almost as long. I narrowed up both sections a little bit. I just took out a few stitches here and there. And this one even blocked out just a little bit looser in general. And it's perfect. It's just one skein. Granted, Mechita and Stroll are light fingering closer to, so they're very generous with their yardage. But I was so happy with both of these, and I keep teetering on the brink of wanting to cast on another one and wanting to design something new, because I like to design things, and my scarf was so well received. I really, really loved how much it was. Just, people liked it, people bought it, and it made me happy. Not just because I made a little bit of money, but because people liked it. And I think that this will make a lot of skeins that are beloved shine and make it something you can wear cozy around your neck instead of just cuddling. Because I do like to cuddle me some yarn. But it's not terribly warm when you go out and about. Now, I don't believe I will have this posted in time for my old introductory code to be valid, but if anyone is interested, I will make sure that the code featheredfriends is valid for 1 week from the date that I post this video. So that will be featheredfriends as the code for the Featherlane shawl. Also, it was my friend Amy who inspired me to do this podcast. She is the lovely lady from the Meaningful Stitch podcast, and if you haven't seen it, you must, because she is just an amazing lady. She's sweet and kind, and she has the most soothing voice. It's a good podcast. If you haven't seen it, you should. I'll put a link in the chat. And the last knit that I have at hand to show you is another one that is an unreleased pattern. This is my Squall shawl. It's chunky. It's made with Malabrigo Rios, so it's a good thick one, which I believe it's an Aran weight yarn. And it's also got Hedgehog Fibres Merino DK, which to me feels exactly the same as the Malabrigo Rios. It claims to not be superwash, but it feels like superwash to me. Either way, I'm not going to risk it. But this is a very long, shallow crescent shawl. And the colors are Malabrigo Rios in Kris, which is one of their newer colorways, and Hedgehog Fibres in Down by the River for this bright stripe. And this is a herringbone stitch. And this wave stitch is one of my favorite ones. And I'm just especially proud of how I got them to match up the gauge, because that was not easy. There's a lot of increases in stitches, there's a huge change in needle size, and it just works out. And I've also done a sample, most of a sample, on fingering weight. So I've also figured out the needle sizes for that, but I have not completed that one, and it's not released. I still need to find some testers for it, and I need to finalize the pattern a little bit, but this is a warm, squishy one that I love to wear in the winter, and it's winter. So as nice as this pretty beaded one is, it's more of an indoor knit. I almost missed one. This one is special. Let's turn off that alarm. This one is special because this is the first hat that I made my daughter. This is Malabrigo Mechita in the colorway Galaxy. And then it's got a little brim just at the edge here. You can see there's just a touch of straight purple. So you can just barely distinguish it right along there. And that purple is Cascade Heritage in the color Italian Plum. And it's the Heritage Silk, which I don't have much of the silk one, but it is very nice. But it's a little bit special just because Cascade Heritage is from my local area of the Northwest of America. I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon, and it's a beautiful place. And every time I use Cascade yarns, I'm reminded of home. And luckily Cascade yarns are fairly affordable and very nice yarns. And Italian Plum is also a little bit special because it took me ages to figure out the name of the plum that I love the most. When I was little, there was a plum tree that grew over from the neighbor's garden. It wasn't our plum tree, but anything that fell in our yard was fair game. And I loved those plums. I've known a few other people who have had similar plum trees in other places, and most of those people, it was their neighbor's plum tree, and it just kind of overhung into their garden, and they got to reap the benefits, and so did I. But it took me ages to figure out the name of that plum tree because nobody knew. Nobody knew what sort of plums they were. When I went to the store, I could never ever find anything like it. And I eventually learned they are the Italian plums, which are also known as the Empress plums. And they are more oval in shape than your standard plums that you find here in the Tesco market. And the flesh is a little bit more firm, and the flesh varies from yellow to just a touch green, and the skin is a dark purple, and it has that thing just like grapes where it has that light dusting on them when you first find them, and you dust it off and you shine it, and it's got a gorgeous deep dark color under this frost. And I finally knew the name of the plums so that someday when I have my own garden, I could, in theory, have my very own plum tree, and I would know what sort of plums I was looking for. And so that's why this one little tiny stripe at the very edge is so special to me. There we have it. There we have some knitting. We have some finished knits. One work in progress. I will introduce you to my current works in progress pile next time. And I hope this is enough for a start, because it's a little bit terrifying starting a podcast. But let's have a go.